morning and welcome to my kitchen. I'm guessing that right now a lot of people are probably making bread for the first time. So I thought I'd make a short video today on how to make bread. Basically because, as you can see, I run out and I need some more. So first thing we're going to do, we're going to look at what ingredients we're going to use. Okay, ingredients. So first ingredient, strong white bread flour. So this is different from ordinary plain flour you might buy and use for baking a cake. It has a much higher protein level. It's good, makes it a bit good for making bread. Next we're going to add a bit of salt. We're going to add a little bit of dried skim milk. Optionally, you can leave it out. A bit of sugar, only a small amount. Now I'm going to use a product called Diax, which adds flavour and improves the crumb. Again, this is optional, so don't worry if you don't have any, but it is nice if you want to try and get some. We're going to add a bit of fat to the bread, and that stops it from drying out quite so quickly. Now, I'm using a vegetable fat, but you can use olive oil or butter or anything you like, really. Now, today we're going to be using fresh yeast, but you can also use dried yeast, which is more readily available. It's just you'll need to adjust your quantities based on what it says on the yeast. So for today we'll use in fresh yeast 2.5%, whereas typically you would only use 1/3 of that in dried yeast. But read the packet, it'll tell you how much to put in relative to the amount of flour. Lastly, we're going to need a mug of coffee, because that's what I generally need to keep me going through the day. So just to recap, there's your list of ingredients. Bread flour, 500 grams we're going to start with for a standard size loaf. And everything else is done as a percentage of that. So you can see we're going to add salt at 1.8%, sugar at 0.8%, Diax, which you can see is optional, 0.5%, fat 3.5%, fresh yeast 2.5%, and water at a temperature of 38 to 40 degrees C, we're going to add 65%. So the advantage of working in percentages is that it doesn't really matter then how much flour you start with. If you've only got 400 grams, not 500, if you work in percentages, it still works out the same. So you can either work in percentages or get your calculator out and work in grams. Okay, looking at equipment we're going to need. We're going to need a set of scales to weigh the ingredients, various bowls and receptacles for measuring stuff out in. A dough scraper is very helpful, but I'm sure you can get by without one. And a thermometer. I use a thermometer to check the temperature of the water. It takes the guesswork out of it. Now I'm going to use a stand mixer for making the dough and for doing the kneading. Now you can do it by hand, just that I've got arthritis in my wrist, so I use a machine. Lastly, we're going to need a bowl once we've made the dough, because the dough's got to ferment, somewhere to live while it ferments and grows in size. Okay, measuring out the ingredients. So, scales are on, put my mixing bowl on, and this set of scales has a tare function. And what that does is it zeroes off the weight of the bowl, so that now it only weighs what I add. So now I'm going to add the flour. I'm going to add approximately 500 grams of flour. And flour in this recipe is the primary ingredient. So that's my flour. So everything else is weighed as a percentage of how much flour I put in. So these scales are clever scales. I'm going to switch to percentage mode now. So it now thinks that that flour is 100%. So when I press the tare button again now, it goes to 0%. So now I'm adding stuff as a percentage. So next I'm going to add salt. And we just gently bring that in. Here we go, 1.9% salt, tear, sugar. Then I want very little sugar, 0.8%. And it just adds a bit of colour to the crust as much as anything else. Next comes milk powder, same amount again, 0.8%. There we go. That just adds a little bit of fluffiness to the bread. Next, diastatic malt. Now this is an optional component, it just improves the flavour. Right, I'm going to add 0.5% of that. Which I think will be the end of this bag. Yep. That's the end of that one. Okay. Next we're adding a bit of fat. I'm using Trex, which is a vegetable one, so you can make this as a vegan loaf, but any other fat will do. And what it does is it prevents your bread from drying out. Okay, so that's all what we consider the dry ingredients, barring the yeast. So the next thing I'm going to do is going to weigh out the yeast. So I'll take my mixing bowl away. Another little bowl for my yeast, 0 off the way to that. I'm going to put, this is fresh yeast. You can use dried yeast, just follow the instructions on the packet for dried yeast. But as this is fresh yeast, I'm going to put about 2.5% yeast in, and that's quite a small amount. And the reason for that is because I want this to take a bit longer, this loaf of bread, and as a result it will taste better. Okay, so that's our yeast. Next component we need is water. So I'm going to measure out the water. This is water that's at 38 degrees C, and I want 65%. Close enough. Okay, so now if you're using dried yeast, generally it goes straight in with the flour, but because we're using fresh yeast, I'm now going to mix some of the water in with yeast to dissolve it into the water. It just helps it distribute through the dough and wakes it all up. And it's important your water's not too hot, because if your water's much hotter than 45 degrees, you run the risk of killing off the yeast. And conversely, bread and dough don't like being chilled, so they don't like it too cold either. Alright, so that's made a nice little soup there with the yeast. Have a quick look. Okay, and I'm going to mix that in now with the flour. Okay, you notice I haven't put all the water in, and that's quite deliberate. So I always keep a bit back. I'll put a bit more in. I'm going to keep back a bit of the water at this point. Now if you're making bread by hand, you put all your dry ingredients on your worktop, make a hole in the middle, and then add the water in the middle, and gently combine all the dry ingredients into the dough. But because I'm using a mixer, I'm just roughly mixing it with a spoon, and then I'm going to set the mixer to work. Okay. Now, water. Now I've still kept back a couple of percent of water because flour does vary, and it varies how much water it will take depending on the weather, how long you've had the flour, various other items. So this is an experience thing. Just don't put all the water in straight away because you might not need it. I'm looking at my dough now. Today it doesn't need any more than that. So what I've put in today is actually about 63%. Right. So in the bowl now, all the flour and water and everything is combined. And what we're going to do now is we're going to leave it to sit there for 5 or 10 minutes. And that's called autolyzing the dough, and it allows the moisture, all the water, to soak into the grains of flour. So come back again, 5 minutes. Okay, let's have a quick look at what the dough looks like at this stage. So, got a nice lump of dough there, everything is evenly combined, but it still looks a bit rough and tumbled. So the next step is, after it's autolyzed, is we're going to knead it for 5 minutes with the machine. So I'm going to set the machine going now, and then we'll leave it going for 5 minutes. And when we come back after 5 minutes, you'll see a very different looking dough. Okay, welcome back. So, dough's been in the mixer now for 5 minutes, and you can see now it's a nice, smooth, silky looking dough. So if you're kneading by hand, you might need to take up to 10 minutes to do this, but the machine does it much more vigorously than my hands ever could. So I'm going to hand the camera over, and now I'm going to take it out. So the kneading process stretches out, works all the gluten that's in the flour and makes it all stringy and gluteny. So, using my dough scraper, I'm going to scrape it into the bowl. Now I should say that the bowl has been lightly oiled so that the dough doesn't stick to it quite as much as it otherwise would. Scrape the last few bits out. Okay, so our dough now is in the bowl, it's lightly oiled, and it's time for it to ferment, and that's probably going to take, at room temperature, at least an hour, because we didn't put that much yeast in it. So to prevent it from drying out and getting the skin on the top, we're going to put a lid on it, but it's not tight, it's just covering it to prevent it from drying out. So we're going to leave that there now until it doubles in size, and I'll come back again and I'll show you what it looks like when that process is finished. Okay, last time we looked at the dough, we were leaving it to rise, and this is what it looks like now after an hour and a half. So it's doubled in size, and it's now ready for knocking back and shaping up. So take a bit of flour, use a dough scraper, take it out of the bowl. Be sure to keep it all in one piece. There we go. And put a little bit of oil, just ordinary cooking oil, on my hands. Right, so knock all the air out, and then we're going to shape it up. So first I'm going to shape it into a ball. I'll try and do this slowly so you can see what I'm doing. And I'm stretching the skin around on the surface here to make a nice surface, lovely and smooth. Now we're going to shape it for the tin. So we're going to make it a bit longer, a bit thinner, and we're going to tuck the ends under like that, whilst trying to maintain a nice smooth surface on top. In the tin it goes. And we're going to leave that to prove now for at least an hour. And again, it will come up at least to the top of that. I'm going to put it in a proving bag this time. This is actually a bin liner. just again to allow it air to circulate, to be with it, but not to dry it out. Keep it in a nice moist environment. And again, nothing special. You can put them in proving drawers. That just speeds up the process. But we're not interested in a speedy process today. What we're interested in today is long and slow, because we get more flavour. So I'm going to leave that there now for at least an hour, and then we'll have a look at it. Okay, so loaf has been proving now for just over an hour. As you can see, it's puffed up nicely. So the next thing we're going to do is decorate it ready for the oven. Shake a bit of flour. With a sharp knife, this is a special blade holder for a razor blade. Just going to put some cuts in it. Go, and that's partly decorative and partly to allow its space to expand, because when we put it in the oven, it's going to have what's called oven spring, and it will all start to puff up, and we've got to have somewhere for that expansion to go. So the loaf is now ready for the oven. So the oven's on heating up, and we're going to heat it up to 220 degrees in non-fan mode. So that's with heat from the top and from the bottom. So not all ovens do that. If you're running it in fan mode, you probably want to run it quite a bit cooler than that. Probably 180. Okay, so oven's hot. Time to put the loaf in the oven. Here it is. Exhibit A, going in the oven. And that's gone in the bottom third of the oven, and underneath it there's a baking tray. I'm just going to add a little bit of water, boiling water, and that's going to make some steam in the oven. Just helps the crust and helps it stay moist, a bit gelatinous as it rises up. So it's going to be in the oven now for 25 minutes, then we're going to take a look at it. Okay, so bread's been in now for 25 minutes. It's time to have a quick look. Not looking too bad. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to tip it out of the tin and leave it upside down for the last few minutes of cooking, just to crust up the bottom. Okay, that needs another 5 minutes in there, then it should be about done. Okay, here we go. It's been in the oven for 30 minutes now. Time to take it out. Here it is. One finished loaf. And we can always check whether it's done. Turn it over. Sounds like a drum, hollow on the bottom. So that is a done loaf.